take some positive action. So what is the most important thing to you about, whatever it happens to be, that's on your agenda or in relation to your product range. You might want to just add another little question, which is simply, why is that? Just seeking a bit more understanding in relation to that first question. Now, second question, which is very, very important. The question number 2 is, what are your expectations exactly? And that is a really important word that you put on the end. What are your expectations exactly? What are your expectations from this meeting? What are your expectations in relation to what you are seeking to do in relation to, for example, a house renovation and all the piping and other equipment you might need, or using us as a supplier, for example? What are your expectations exactly? And then, question number 3, which is the hypothetical question, if I could deal with these issues for you, if I could show you how to deal with these particular expectations or meet them for you, can we move forward? And then you can have whatever words you want to. So what we're asking someone to do is to set out emotionally why they wish to engage, what their expectations are exactly, that's semi-left brain, and then the hypothetical question, which is joining up the dots. It's giving them the solution. And then maybe you'd like to check if there's anything else that might get in the way. Now that is a very, very effective way of using left brain and right brain to bring somebody to a course of action. Just on the left brain, right brain thing, it's very, very important to engage both left brain and right brain. Always, always, always start a conversation or a meeting with the word want. What do you want? Question for another book. People are interested in 3 things, and only 3 things. Your customers, your colleagues, you, respectfully, are interested in 3 things. If you are not listening to me right now, it's because you're thinking about one of 3 things. What are those 3 things? Okay, so yourselves, right? So people are always thinking about either themselves or, you can have a book for that, by the way, or this. Not sure that's true. What's the other 2 things that we think about all the time?
Food.
Yeah, okay, I'll give you that. We call it pleasures. So we're either thinking about ourselves, our pleasures, or our
needs.
Problems. Pleasures, problems, or ourselves. That's all we ever think about. If you really drill it down, you analyse everything you think about as one of those 3 things. And your customers are no different. So you have to engage, you have to start with what do you want, because that's about them. Not let me tell you about all the things you need. They are not interested in what you have to say. They have a problem, they have an expectation. If you meet it, you sell. It's as simple as that. And I can give you hundreds of examples of businesses that I've worked with over the years where that is effective, where that applies. Okay, how many people in this room, one at a time, how many people in this room often get objections from customers? You're too expensive, delivery, all the stuff, all the obstacles that you have to deal with. How many of you deal with objections kind of day to day? I don't know if you've ever been trained to sell, but I've listened to loads of sales trainers over the years, and with a huge amount of respect to all of them, most of them have never actually sold anything, which is quite ironic really, isn't it? But they all read this information out of a manual that says something along the lines of, if somebody says, it's too expensive, you say, well, what's expensive about it? Or, I want to think about it. What do you want to think about? That's called creating conflict, and that's not the way to handle an objection. But that's the way we've all been taught, isn't it? I'm not sure if that's your experience, but it's certainly mine, and unless you know something else, that's the way most people have been taught down the years. Unfortunately, that's not the way to do it. So over many, many years of consulting with businesses, what I've developed is a way of handling objections, whether it's a personal dispute at home, for example, it's effective there too, or in business, with a colleague. It manifests itself in lots of different ways, but this is the way, and the only way, to effectively deal with an objection. I have a script which I can distribute to Polypipe through Kevin if you're interested in reading up a little bit more about this. But essentially there are 3 component parts to dealing with an objection. Step number 1, you do not create conflict. In fact, you do the reverse. And that's not the way we're typically taught. Most of us are taught to be confrontational because that's our natural human reaction to something that makes us feel uncomfortable. So embrace the objection, bear with me for a second, but embrace the objection, rather than create conflict by pushing back against it. So a typical way that you might embrace an objection is you would say something like, I'm so glad you mentioned that, or I'm so pleased you mentioned that. Now obviously if somebody says, I don't like Polypipe, don't say I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that would be a bit weird. But then you would embrace it by saying thanks for being so honest, or thanks for being candid. That's still embracing the objection. And the thing about engaging with a human being, whether it's on the telephone or face-to-face, is you have to take charge of the conversation. The minute you give ground, they step in, take control of the situation, then it's I want to think about it, and I'm not sure about this, and it's one thing after another after another. By embracing the conversation, by embracing the objection, watch what happens next. Because one or two things will happen. Either they will say, what do you mean by that? Or give me more information, which is great, that's verbal permission to proceed. Or they will stay silent. Typically they will kind of go, this is weird, this is not the way it's supposed to work, which gives you permission to move to step number 2. And that's the bit about becoming world-class in terms of empathy, building great relationships. And you can do it in one simple sentence. And the sentence is this: if I was you, I would feel exactly the same way. That's empathy in a sentence. That is about telling somebody, look, I get it, I hear what you're saying. If I was you, I'd draw the same conclusions. I'm not agreeing with them. I'm going to solve the problem. I'm going to answer their question in a moment, handle the objection. But for the moment, I want them to know that I'm just like they are. Because the basic human interaction works on the premise that if you are like me, or perceive yourself to be like me, you like me instinctively. That's true, isn't it? So, step number 1, just to recap, 100% welcome the objection. That's what the 100 stands for. So, no problem, let's talk about it. That's a departure from what we've been taught in life generally. Step number 2, create empathy. If I was you, I'd be feeling the same way. Step number 3 is the really important part, because emotionally, they may have made a decision to work with you, but they haven't quite got over the line yet, and they need that left brain bit to help them create the logical ratification, if you like, for their decision to proceed with a purchase. We call that the logical question, unsurprisingly. And typically, if somebody says, I can't afford it, or it's too expensive, you might say something like, if I was you, I'd be thinking the same way, and if I could never use the word but, and if I could show you how all of our other customers benefit from a lower price overall by working with Polypipe because, would that be of value? Never use the words to you, because then it becomes emotional again. So would that be of value? In other words, if I can show you how actually, and then you fill in the gap, would that be of value? And if you can introduce the third party, the consensus at the same time, so much the better. And you will always get a yes, 100% of the time. And if there's anyone in this room that takes this idea away and perfects it, practices it over and over again and starts to use it, and it doesn't work, in other words, somebody says no to you, you can drop me an email, I will send you a book at my own cost as an apology for wasting your time. Is that fair? Here's the thing about logical questions. If I ask anyone in this room a logical question, the answer by definition must be yes. It must be. Otherwise you look stupid. Because it's not me. If I ask a logical question, the answer will always be yes. So that's how the objection handling technique works. You can use it on the telephone or face-to-face. Right, thinking back to the question, what's the 3 things that people always think about? Let's just focus on ourselves for a moment. Just think about, maybe not write down because you've got people sitting around you, but just think about 3 things for the moment that you'd quite like other people to know about you. I don't mean deep dark secrets, just kind of 3 things that you'd be more than happy to share. That if somebody knew when your birthday was, you'd quite like to get a phone call, or a particular hobby or interest that not that many of your colleagues know about. And if you're in management, by the way, seek to understand a little bit more about some of your employees, because that's the thing they spend all their time thinking about, is themselves and their problems and their pleasures. So in respect to CRM, Hyatt Hotel is a great example of a business who created a CRM around what people were using in their minibars. Do you know about this? So what they did was every time a guest checked out, the minibar guy or lady would go in, restock it, and they would make a note which they'd upload onto the CRM that showed the hotel what that particular customer or guest was consuming from the minibar. So next time they visited the hotel, the minibar would be stocked with more of the things that they consumed the last time. No one would say anything, but when they got down their hands and knees and opened the fridge, there would be all the gin and tonics and the little things like that. So CRM is a really, really good way to really get to understand your customers and build great relationships. Every single day, I'm making a phone call to somebody. It's a birthday phone call, that's all it is. Birthday phone call. Hi, how are you, Fred? Just a quick call to wish you happy birthday. This is not a business call, it's not about anything else, it's always about just them. Many happy returns of the day. 7 times out of 10, they engage in a conversation about something. Come and speak at a conference, can we ask your advice on this, that or the other? But you're not instigating the conversation, they are. The one thing I know about birthday phone calls is that the people who call me on my birthday are one of 2 groups of people. Family and friends. Imagine if you were the one professional person in their life that just had the time to pick up the phone and just say happy birthday. Something as simple as that. A bereavement in a family, a marriage, for example, birth of a child. Little things like the last product they purchased. Those tiny little things, how are you getting on with such and such? It's almost spooky when someone takes that much care to understand who you are and what you do. So I would encourage you to share information with each other about the information that you glean. And if you are really savvy when it comes to initial contact with a new customer client, start asking them a little bit about themselves. Take that information and regurgitate that information the next time you engage with them. Now, here's another little thing. Look, I'm very familiar with your product range, and it is pretty extensive, it would be fair to say. So here's the thing I just want to share about choice. Because if I walk into a store and I'm confronted with, 300 different types of pipes,